exercise foresight, poor eyesight, couldn't fist fight, had to overcompensate. Learn to be clairvoyant, see around corners, read signals and warnings, interpret omens, respond accordingly to...
Broadcast from later, Macy Sue, Valdez-Sillins, Udit Vera, Robert Bolton, is me, and Eric Chan, aka EEPMON, the Ottawa-based digital artisan and my old friend. Weak signals are stuff we notice and suspect could mean significant change is on the horizon. This is us, knowing nothing in public, struggling to make sense of stuff we don't understand yet, and welcoming you to watch. Macy, what's your weakest signal?
It's not necessarily a weak signal, but I've been reading about WeChat stickers and sticker culture in China and how it's become what somebody in a Substack blog is calling a Moodboard Industrial Complex. And so there are like leaderboards, there are like speculation markets, there are sticker talent agency, copyright trolls, censorship mechanisms that kind of governs this culture, this economy. And it's also like this whole category of expression on its own. Like out of 40 billion messages sent daily on WeChat, 10 billion are stickers. Yeah, it's become the mood board of the culture. It's kind of like being able to say things that you feel, but not actually saying it, being visible without committing to it. And there's also this culture of laziness being radical, what they're calling this terminal laziness that's being revealed and expressed through these stickers. And so I was just interested in it in terms of like, what is this shared vocabulary that is allowing people to talk about life in a culture that is like sometimes not as open about how they're feeling. There's different things to it. There's like thinking about the creator. There's also a lot of precarity in that because it's like, you know, needing to understand the copyright system and, you know, register your copyright right away. There's also like the work culture behind it. And then there's also like that communication aspect and expression that's interesting in there.
Why do they think it's a signal of laziness?
No, it's not a signal of laziness, but it's more like the generation embracing laziness as like a radical act. It's almost like how here we're saying like sleep is radical or like rest is radical. For them is like this resonation of like that 996 life. And now is turning into like a 007 work culture, like midnight to noon, 7 days a week type of thing.
Just to clarify, yeah, I'm trying to figure out. It's in the content, not in the use of the stickers, like the types of things that they're talking about.
Yeah, it's in the content.
It's like they're like looking at the stickers, they're all like Rila Kuma and Gudetama memes, or type of things, which is like all like laziness.
Yeah, I think it's just like a way to counter social pressures and the idea of like a slob being something that people relate and identify with, and it's a way to counteract that productivity culture.
The aesthetics are like super Japanese to me.
That seems appropriate.
Like, what is like the history of these stickers? Do you know?
Well, stickers in general, there's like iconography back to like woodblock prints, which is like capturing sentiments of everyday life. But I think in reading about how the creators come up with these things, it's just like a lot of them are not trained artists or illustrators. The idea is like to be able to create like a character that also brings a part of yourself into it. And then other people relating to it and using it as a means to talk about their life without actually talking about their life.
I have a prof who I used to work with who wrote like a book on the history of like Japanese media culture, or it was called Japanese Media Mix. It was like a specific strategy that animation companies took in the 70s all through up till today. And they basically like had this transmedia strategy where they would like take a piece of content and then try to like split it up and make money from all the different components. So it was literally stickers put on lunchboxes. So that's actually where the idea of like stickers and apps comes from. It is literally, it used to be stickers that were put like on lunchboxes. And I guess like here in like Canada, I mean, I had stickers as a kid, but they were never like particularly like transmedia stickers. Like it wasn't like I had like some character I identified with who I put on my lunchbox, you know? Whereas I think there was like a tradition to blur like commerce and storytelling in a particular way that was unique to Japan at that time. And then I'm sure it's bled into different ways and has like changed as well. And like a big sticker company in the 2000s was Line. That was like the big one that everyone was like all excited about, that had the first like characters like the sad moon, the drunken rabbit, like all these characters you could identify with.
I like Sally the Duck.
So is that a North American one, or is that a
that's the Line character? Yeah, it's like the bird, the yellow bird. Yeah,
so that's cool. So you know about them?
Oh yeah. Like, well, what's really interesting about how the Line stickers came out? What I really found really interesting. The fact is that their expressions are pretty monotone. You know, they're very homogeneous in a way. What I was very fascinated by how they were designed, because a simple teardrop, for example, or sort of the two lines when they come down when they're frustrated, like a little subtle change can give an entire different emotional response, and it's so subtle and nuanced that people get it. Alluding to basically what Macy was saying, that these characters are like they're icons. A slight change in the icon can create a totally different. And I thought that they were so brilliant. It was really brilliant. I think they really strategized in how to execute.
It takes 7 lines on like a piece of paper to draw a recognizable face. I think that's like the estimate or something like that, which is like a great, like when you mentioned like the teardrop, that's what it made me think of, like how many lines does it take to represent an emotion? It's very few, it turns out.
The reason why is because of, I think, this transmedia strategy that was adopted, right? Like you want to be able to represent these faces and these characters across different mediums where you have very little information density, information throughput, because you're using a 2D surface, you're probably operating in like super low resolution environments too. So you have like, you want to be able to have a sticker that's printable on paper, that's viewable in an app, but also it's like a nice 3-dimensional character when it's built into a mascot and paraded down the street. So you want to have everything that works across those like media.
That's the beauty about simplicity, I mean, like it is the hardest to achieve. And to your point, is that but once you are able to lock that concept down, the translation between different formats, different mediums, it starts to grow and has tentacles in all of these different areas. And I think that is what makes a strong mascot design. I did a mascot for Queen's Cafe. It's not there anymore, but it is this Queen's. And also, what mascots are really great to is that also communicates cross-generational. You're young to very old, get it, and it's not more like, it's more emotional. And this Queen was like, okay, well, at the time, they're like, okay, our demographic are much older, but we need to appeal to the younger generation of spenders. And they never had a mascot. Well, since you're called Queen's Cafe, established in 1942, if you had this Queen's as a mascot, then yeah, I mean, this character is black and white. It's so simple. Not just the character is simple, but the color is very, very simple. And I made over 200 illustrations, over 200 of them, and then we use it for so many things. Comic merch, but we made into a statue. We made into actually culinary chocolates, accessories. And it was a fun exercise. What was nice is that the character remained the same, but because it was so simple, it wasn't too difficult to repurpose the character to have different expressions or different emotions and different seasons.
It's just like interesting to think that the way that they use just like just a regular image or a meme or like an emoji in some ways also. But like, what is the purpose of like still preserving the skeuomorphicness of it? Like, the fact that it's actually still a sticker. And
why do we even call it a sticker instead of just a GIF or an emoji?
Yeah. Why is it still a sticker?
Isn't it basically the same thing as those? Yeah.
An emoji is like emoting your expression, but then a sticker is like, I guess there's like not as much ties or like restrictions to like realism in a sense.
To me, I think that like what I think of is like actually there's like ways that people like interact with it, which like if you think about it as a sticker, like you actually bring in the way you interact with it in the physical world into like this digital space a little bit. Things like, you buy sticker packs. Like if you get stickers, digital stickers, they come bundled, which is, and like you can be collecting them in a way that like you do with physical stickers. So it is interesting to keep that differentiation. But I've never thought about this before.
Because like you're right. I mean, I would never say I'm going to send you a sticker, but if I'm really sending an emoji, those little icons, And when I'm, for example, Facebook's got you have the stickers, and I think of them as stickers. And maybe these characters, and it makes you saying these characters, they're more elaborate.
There's a universe. There's a cinematic universe.
Yeah, there's a bit of there's definitely world building
universe.
to it. Yeah. Like you're immersed in that world.
Totally.
But agree, it becomes like it's a product. Like you want to collect them all, or there are like limited editions, and then some of them you can't download anymore. And
why would you want to have limited edition emojis? It doesn't feel right. Like, unless there's this like emoji pack.
I find it confusing, like the mix of like as a function when I'm sending a message from a phone, it's like you have a separate category here for emojis and stickers, and they're like in my mind maybe just culturally distant from sticker collection. Like they do the exact same thing. Okay,
here's the thing. You can say that if you are to respond to somebody with just an emoji, I'm talking about just the faces or whatever, like that's embedded in the iPhone and all. That in itself is like, the way subconsciously is like the user is like responding, but is really at the low tier energy of paying attention to the YouTube.
It's just an emoji.
Just an emoji.
Sticker, this is actually like more than language.
Fire.
Right.
Fire, right? It's just like, okay, but then if you have a sticker, at least for me, I would have some form of communication, and it takes time to search the right sticker.
Mm-hmm. Actually, the effort point is really interesting, I think, because now there's like the even easier where you just like react. It's not even like really an emoji, right? Thumbs up in the comment, what the other person said or whatever. It's almost a diss.
Yeah.
It's not a diss. What it is like acknowledgement, and you don't have to like type a message that somebody else will feel obligated to reply to.
There's a punctuation mark on both of your conversations.
The sticker phenomena is like, it's not binary, It's like you're creating an emotion from you, but then trying to find the right way of responding via emotion, not yes or no, not black and white.
Yeah.
It's not definitive. It's a very safe space to respond. Not sure.
Is it? It's more subtlety and more nuance and more like, I guess, variety to add like some kind of cultural association.
Or you're also trying to find like the most opportune moment. Like you might have like a sticker that you really want to use, but you're like waiting for that moment to use it.
Every time somebody sends a sticker, I'm just confused by the sticker because you need to like know the cinematic universe. Otherwise, like, I don't know what half these stickers mean. Like, what do these characters stand for?
Well, that's why there are also like huge fan bases for these characters, or like the creators, because you can never like make a proper living out of being a sticker creator on your own, unless you're like part of a sticker studio or something. But they have like these fan bases that like take care of their well-being and like ask about how they are, like have they eaten dinner or whatever. So there's like that community there that are really attuned to the world of both the creator and the characters.
Yeah. So I was laughing because like Robert just sent me like
sent him one of these touch messages that I don't fully understand.
That's like you sending your touch digitally.
Yeah, I feel it, Robert.
That's like I feel like that's like very high information density. It's very high emotional density through the wire.
Did you send them?
I have never sent one.
That was like the second one. The last time I did it, I sent it. Me and someone else had both hit the heart button at the same time to messages, and it was like a sent and received at the same time. And they commented on that, and then I sent that as like a power up.
Right.
And it was like, that felt like appropriate. It was the first time I'd ever felt like, I should use that thing to talk about a cosmic synchronicity.
I wonder if it's gone up like during remote season when everyone's like working remotely as a way to like feel cosmically connected in some way.
Okay, so we got emojis, we got stickers, and then with the next level 3 be like GIF memes. We got all 3 tiers.
The GIF memes never really took off in Asia. It was the stickers.
Really?
I wonder the reason why, because like the GIF memes, if you think about all of them, sorry, I'm saying GIF. I usually say GIF.
Sorry, my bad.
It's because like a lot of the GIF memes are like, are ported from like North American cultural references and stuff. So if you buy into like the cinematic universe theory of stickers, then we already have the equivalent with GIFs, because we already have cinematic universes in like our TV shows. And in the East, I think like there's more interesting and more diverse forms of media.
What about this Moodboard Industrial Complex? Can you tell us a bit more about where that came from, Macy?
I mean, that was just something that this person in their Substack called it because of all the labor that's involved and like the competitiveness, and then now like the precarity that is on the creators to really like come up with a copyrightable character that they can then exploit and create like different character variations without knowing what would stick. And then they're like leaderboards and copyright trolls that would try to imitate things, and or if you are a creator you're unable to get the rights to your character in time, you might actually be infringing on somebody who was able to register your character before you. So just, I guess, like the aggressiveness of that and the increasing labor that's involved.
Okay. Signal and noise, would it?
I think it's a noise in the sense that it's been happening stickers have been happening for a while. Like it's not, to me, it's like just not, if we define signal as being something new, then it's not new to me.
Travis?
I almost want to sit out of like judging this one because I don't think I have I think the moodboard industrial term is like great, and I'm like curious to think about that more. And I think there's like something in that concept that I think probably you could think of as a signal. But
yeah, I like that moodboard industrial complex. I mean, we're probably getting different ideas than what was intended by author that Macy's referring to, but just like the cultural forces coming together, I guess, to create a taste for something at a certain moment and a continuous basis, and to like play that thing out just as quickly in order to move on to the next thing. So
because emotions are not like as natural as anyone thinks. Like affect in your body is very, it just happens, but emotions are like coded by social expectations, by ways that we have of like thinking of emotions. And so like the idea that I don't know, these like computer devices like mobile phones where we're like engaging with all of these different like emotive channeling mechanisms, and we're literally creating little mood gardens and stuff for ourselves. It's very weird to think about what that means for like the future of emotion and stuff like that.
I like that. Eric, signal and noise.
I'm kind of borderline. I mean, I'm almost in the same boat. I think it's a little bit of a signal and noise. We're talking about emojis, GIFs, and stickers and all that. It's almost as if we are moving towards a transmedium language, universal language that maybe we understand more, sort of like by looking at pictorial pieces versus verbally expressing them. So perhaps this some indication of expressing something that's beyond specific language, like written language, speaking language. So yeah, maybe perhaps there's potential there, but we're just having fun with it. But there hasn't not been enough dive bomb analysis of why these phenomena are happening on an emotion level, language level, etc.
Yeah, for me, I think this is like absolutely signal, even though it's been happening for a long time. Just this in what we call text messages, which were once actually text messages, having so many of these weird options to have with like including digital touch and including stickers that are separate from these other things that do almost the same thing apparently, that are emojis, and like that there's like 2 to 3 or more variations of that, or you can send a JPEG like meme or whatever that
right.
Something similar. Like there's I think like a new field of study or something to happen here that's like its own weird linguistics, literature, like semiotics hybrid maybe, that's just around conversations via text. There's long-term significance to like what this signal is going to mean to language and communication. So you can look at it narrowly, and it's been happening for several years, and it could be not that interesting, but I think on like a long time horizon, like we're seeing something emerge that's like significant as a signal. Eric, what's your weakest signal?
Okay, I'm not a quantum physicist or anything like that, but I really think that the world of quantum is such a new phenomena in what was considered science fiction, Star Trek-y and Star Wars. It's now part of our lexicon now. It's part of almost every day. We might not know it now, like we don't.
Like quantum physics, you're talking about?
Well, it's quantum mechanics, quantum computing, quantum cybersecurity. Like quantum is like it's going to be the next huge paradigm shift. In our previous, when we started talking about the whole idea of IoTs and singularities, like classical computing is dead. It's over. So the crazy thing is there's all these hacking happening all over the place, and we need another paradigm shift like quantum to really take everything to the next level. Society, privacy, communications, hack-proof, etc. Like so. I think all the conversations that we're having, right, transmedium, just sort of like the idea of emotion versus just like, black and white and yes or no, day or night. It just so happens that the quantum is always that flux between zeros and ones. It's almost infinite dimensions, multi-dimensional. And I think that we're at a stage that I'm beginning to see that signal where we are starting to embrace that. This could fall into beyond just pure science or pure mathematics. We're talking about consciousness, even spirituality. These conversations, I think, are very important. And I think quantum theory, all that kind of general relativity are all part of that discourse. So I'm just throwing it out there. Okay, so that being said, have you guys been keeping up with the whole unidentified Arial Phenomena that the Pentagon had just released? We don't know all the facts or have all the data, but Pentagon on like a couple of days ago just officially announced that yes, UFOs do exist, and they announced that they have no idea what they are. The observed technology that these craft are able to do is like move around at 90-degree angles, no form of propulsion system. You got radar data. They're looking at all the information. However, they don't see any exhaust fumes. These things drop from 80,000 feet all the way to water or even underwater without any sort of form of physical, derivative, like splashes and stuff like that. A long story short, this poses a national security to the United States. This could be a huge failure of intelligence gathering, because is it from adversaries? We don't know. Is it something else? We don't know. I think they've documented if I'm not mistaken, that there's like 143 cases from credible sources, military, Top Gun pilots, and even the then director of the Advanced Aerial Threat Identification Program, ATIP, Lou Elizondo. So we have scientists trying to figure that out. Like, okay, well, Neil deGrasse Tyson's like totally dismissing, is totally like shutting it down. Academics shutting it down. There's got to be an explanation. This can't be, there's no way that this technology is like leapfrogs our current, or even are considered advanced technology or state-of-the-art technology. So yeah, quantum, but I think that indication that society is shifting toward that sort of holistic endeavor. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, and yeah, I just throw it out there. That's my signal.
I read that release from, are you talking about the one that came out 2 days ago, right?
The Pentagon report. It was 9 pages. It's pretty lame, but apparently that was a good first start or something.
My takeaway from that is that they were basically saying these are UFOs, they're unexplained, and the way it was written seemed like they were trying to justify asking for more money for investigation, which seems fair. And I think, to me, I would just be questioning, like, how else is this surveillance technology going to be used if they have access to it? And like what kinds of technologies are we allowing the military to have access to, and how is it being justified, and how is this consent being sought from broader society, and what is it in the end going to be used for? There's a justification right now, which is that it's going to be used for UFO exploration, but I don't know if that's actually the case, or it might be the case right now, but who knows? I'm just suspicious of surveillance technology and military access to it. Yeah, and the quantum stuff, I do think that there are like classical ways of thinking that are being challenged right now. I don't know if I would go so far and to say that it has to do with quantum mechanics, and quantum theory has been around for a while now. We use, your phone works using quantum mechanics right now. Solid state physics, which is what's used for semiconductors, relies on a strong understanding of quantum field theory, quantum electrodynamics. Like, this is all, like, we know we are using quantum mechanics today in our technologies. I think there is a specific strand of quantum technology that's coming up right now, which is quantum computing, which is slightly different, which is to shift away from analog and digital towards using quantum bits, which are not quite analog, not quite digital, where information is encoded in terms of probabilities as opposed to static, either binaries or continuous signals, either discrete or continuous signals. I think that shift is happening. I think it's going to take a long time for that shift to actually place because of fundamentally difficult technical hurdles that need to be overcome. For example, if you're working with unstable systems, how do you create the stability for it to be reproducible? And so there are things like people are talking about, we can create these controlled environments to create quantum mechanical systems by operating at extremely low temperatures, because the reason why you need extremely low temperatures is because you don't have a lot of energy that's radiating, what's called black body radiation, that can affect how the bits are changing, how the electrons are moving in the space. So making that technology industry ready is going to be, I just don't see it happening soon. Personally, I think it's going to take a while. There's also the software side, which is okay, if we do have quantum mechanical systems that can open up new types of computation, what are the kinds of computation that it can enable? So I think there are ways that people are using quantum mechanics and language around quantum mechanics in non-scientific ways to talk about what's happening outside of the field, which I think are as useful to us to a small extent, because I think it's important to use metaphors to expand ways of thinking, but I think it's overly used. Personally, I think it's overly used. And this includes people like Deepak Chopra and others who would talk about non-scientific things using scientific language. And it just creates confusion around what these terms actually means. And I think it takes advantage of people's lack of understanding of some of these scientific topics and misdirects them to believe some things are more true than they are.
I mean, so this UAP report came out, and there was a Washington Post interview. This guy was a sort of ex-director of the government group that was studying this stuff, and was talking about some of these things. And in terms of what are the sources of these unexplainable aerial phenomena that are apparently moving in ways that nothing we've been able to observe or classify as moved and sort of against the wind, turning at unbelievable force on a dime, things like that. He was sort of explaining we don't know what this is, outer space, inner space, from under the sea, from it's some between space that we don't know of or haven't accessed or observed before. He brought up, I forget exactly how he brought up a quantum theory of the universe within that sort of long list of
Does he talk about Bohmian mechanics? Is that what he was talking about? Pilot wave theory?
I think so.
That's a trendy thing in quantum mechanics right now. People are talking.
I think where the conversation regarding to quantum and all that, so where it could fit in that narrative is that Elizondo has said look, we have 5 observables, right? Bill, taste, etc. And what these things seem to do is sort of defy a binary understanding of how things work. And if you look at the night sky, you just look at the night sky, you're very nice, pretty stars. But then there are so many different type of realities, as you've alluded to. You have Wi-Fi coursing through us, microwaves, neutrinos coming from the sun. All these different realities are bombarding us. You don't perceive them. And apparently, 99% of the universe is we have really no idea. And I think that where he talks about, we have to keep a very open mind. All options are on the table. As he said, we have to keep an open mind on how to discern and understand what these things are. And he did allude something about, we're just starting to pick away. I mean, I know you said that quantum has been there for quite a while, but there's more to unravel in that space. There are all these different things are in between. And I think he was saying that the scientific community seems to be very, very, and rightfully so, hard on the facts and hard on the data based on observables. And what these things seem to be doing, seem to be defying these observables with so much. They've got the radar data. They have all this data. It's sort of like, yeah, I think society, at least from a Western perspective, I'm totally assuming here, but I think that we more prepared and primed to accept being open-minded versus, let's say, if this was happening like 200 years ago. So I think there's a momentum happening.
I find it interesting in this report. I mean, it says it's most likely a different cause in many of these cases. And it talks about like airborne clutter. It talks about natural phenomenon, which for whatever reason seems like the simplest and most right explanation as far as I can see, which is something that would totally warrant more investigation if it's unexplained in itself. But it's interesting that they do use the word technology a lot in talking about this phenomena, which is like, to me, feels like a huge assumption, but it's just an interesting choice of language. I don't know. I'm curious what everybody thinks about that, if you see something that moves in a way you're not used to seeing picked up on a radar, do you assume that it's an advanced technology? It says a handful of UAP appear to demonstrate advanced technology, and in that they remain stationary in winds aloft, move against the wind, maneuver abruptly, move at considerable speed without discernible means of propulsion, and in a small case, military aircraft systems process radio frequency energy associated with UAP sightings. That is a bold assumption. A degree of signature management.
But the report does not say that this technology was not from them, right? I don't think they mentioned that these are not U.S. black projects. At least
the existence of the report, I think, presumes that they don't want us to think it's them.
Yeah, true. No, we never know when.
No, I mean, from what I've heard, it's unlikely that it's American technology or a foreign nations or adversarial nations technology.
I mean, we can take it how it is, what the report is, and just because it's anchored as the Pentagon doesn't mean it could be a way to like blindside us for their potential other agendas and whatnot. But the word technology signifies, and if you trust them, means that they probably have a lot more data that they have that they have not disclosed yet. If they're not going to do it, Jeremy Corbell is going to do it.
He's a writer or something?
He was the one who leaked the videos. And then the Pentagon had to follow suit and confirm that, yes, they are real. And that's how the whole thing started. Like, there's a lot of things that they're not telling us. But to say that's technology, that just means that there's something that they know. Like, public do not have the unclassified.
I think the only thing that to me is very interesting about it is that it's like human, like pilot machine assemblages is where like all the craziest like computer tech and human like hybrids were like catalyzed in the 20th century, like heads up displays were developed there, like all sorts of like technology, because planes are just crazy things to fly. They far exceed human capacities for sensing, and they need computation to be able to like even manage this machine that won't tear itself apart. And so to me, it's like these are a bunch of artifacts from this weird mashup of like human computing intersections in the 20th century. Like that's how I see it. It's like, what are these artifacts, these little blips and blobs and whatever? Because there's unexplained stuff everywhere, and nobody like causes a ruckus about it, But the reason people do with UFOs is because it's a religious feeling. It's like what a miracle would have been, centuries ago, right? It's this unexplained thing that we then project what we think is the most likely answer, which is that like, oh, other beings must be flying tin can things that we can't figure out, just as we do. And it's like, that seems so implausible to me relative to like all the forms that life expansion could take in the universe, that it's going to mirror exactly the kind of form function as we have today, like it's so implausible.
I think that's exactly where the conversation's like getting more interesting at this moment, is that it's sort of like this conversation has graduated from it's like a tin can flying saucer or whatever, or is starting to, like, there's still a lot of people who conceive of it the way you're talking about, but even the shift to calling it unexplained aerial phenomenon rather than unidentified flying object is significant, like to exactly what you're saying. Like, flying object is this like tin can, like somebody's flying this thing. Unexplained aerial phenomena is like, maybe this is like, something weirder, something that we don't quite get, something like, is this natural or is this Yeah. And what is that even? And is this natural in a way that we're not even used to studying, you know?
I mean, I think the only reason it generates any interest is because it's the assumption that it's some kind of alien life form, right? That's like it's not just an unexplained phenomena, because there's unexplained phenomena everywhere. Like everywhere you look, you're going to find stuff, and nobody's like calling like, oh, we need more.
Well, the most interesting thing about this particular thing is that it was like there's like UFO people talking about UFOs for a while. Like what's interesting now is like the Pentagon engaging in these conversations. There's like legitimate institutions that are talking about this. And so like why to me is like the interesting question. Like what are they trying to get out of this conversation? Is it because of them wanting to sort of advance the science around possibly just weird weather phenomena? It's possible, like there is some benefit to that. Or is it access to different kinds of surveillance technologies? Possibly. I don't know. Like the motivations to me are like the most interesting things. Like why are these institutions talking about this right now? And what changed to cause them to talk about it? That's so crazy to me.
Some obvious answers to that, which is like the off chance that this is something that's like potentially is surveillance technology or is being weaponized against the US in some way is probably the big deal for the Pentagon.
But at the same time, the report does not rule it out. That can be an unknown. It could be enemies of the United States, or it could be something else that's unknown, unexplained, and we have yet to, with our current level of technology, physics, whatnot, cannot explain.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that the exciting thing would be if it leads to some understanding of the natural world or physics of our universe. I mean, I get the sense from you that you feel like this is all leading to some sort of like potential cultural awakening and sort of how we framework our world or see our world or something like that.
Yeah,
between quantum being like a step away from binary thinking or whatever, and
right, yeah. I mean, I may be seeing it in a very non-scientific or educated perspective, but like, yeah, it is a shift as you described it, and we are more accepting of looking at things that dive into consciousness, dive into spirituality. These are, I feel, as important and significant in addition to scientific fact finding. It's part of that. It cannot be dismissed as like yahoos. There's a reason why we have to meditate. There's a reason why we have to reflect, reflection, alignment, all these sort of things.
I think that part I agree with. Isn't that like I think there's like in general in the last like it's more than just like this decade, I would say like a while, and that there's been a shift towards like post-positivist ways of thinking. You're not looking at just what you can measure, what evidence you can find, and I think that has had effects on like the scientific establishment as well. I personally don't think that this particular phenomena, it's not that I don't believe, I think it's just I'm afraid that once you start opening up conversations where anything is possible, like we are dismissive of like facts that we already know.
And is that maybe the answer to the other question about why right now? Because that's exactly what's going on these days. Opening up conversations to anything is possible. And so it's like, this is the moment to like get funding for UAP research. Like,
yeah, is it just like a very carefully crafted, glorified PR campaign to get investment and not really making any conclusions, but also saying like, we don't know.
Well, yeah, it's like the cynical surveillance state view would be that's what it's for. That it's, I don't mean in a conspiratorial or type of way or anything, just saying that the moments line up, that like, it's not coincidental that the government is talking about UAPs or UFOs again in the moment where basically globally acknowledged that a lot of people see this as a post-truth world, and where all of these things have been building up for the past year, where facts are all controversial now in a way that they hadn't been 10 years ago.
You're just seeing the moments line up.
Yeah.
It's not like unsurprising that the moments line up. Like I think the government is talking about that. I personally think the government is talking about it because the moment kind of lines up, that you can talk about these things like this in the way that they're talking about it.
The paper mentions the stigma as well, and I think that's like interesting, right? It's like the people who are talking about it, everyone mentions that it was like there was a stigma associated with bringing this stuff up, and I think that's where the moment's lining up, right? It's like there's not as much of a stigma of talking about, but what if this? What if like this is possible with no evidence, right? Since you and I have had conversations about this where I've been the more skeptical about UFOs Yeah, that's a little bit different, I guess, about alien intelligence specifically.
I mean, I'm certain that there are many unexplained. I think that it's interesting that this conversation is happening right now when the boundaries of like what is considered facts has been completely obliterated because of what is monetizable. And like it's interesting to see how these like conversations can be shaped and are being shaped. Some of them on purpose, and some of them just kind of like emergently by all kinds of actors. That's what's happening to me.
Signal or noise, is it?
I think it's a signal of what I just said.
Yeah, you just articulated. Macy, signal or noise?
Yeah, I think it's a signal for, I don't know, all of these things. I'm just concerned about what Uda was saying in terms of motivation behind who's generating these conversations and like using intentionally crafted language to garner certain support and to sway opinion, while taking advantage of like this moment.
I don't even think like what they're doing is, it doesn't even strike me as strange. That's the funny part. I'm just like, oh, it's just the government releasing information about stuff that it doesn't really know much about. And like, okay, maybe to some degree that could be considered strange that there's like, they're releasing a document with like epistemic uncertainty. Like, but I don't even think that's that strange. But I don't think it's like a 5D chess game where they're like manipulating things. Maybe they're trying to raise funding. Sure, I think that's something. But that, yeah, I don't see it as interesting in that regard. I do see it as interesting as like the willingness of people to believe. I think like the sheer level of faith that I think it demonstrates that people need to have or want to have in terms of like how we see ourselves in the universe and stuff. And like, I think that's interesting. And then as like an artifact of just like a weird 20th century experiment in mashing up the human senses with like computing, sensing technologies that go far beyond our capacities. It's very interesting as like an artifact. But
me, I find it extremely interesting. I mean, this is sort of the very first public acknowledgement by U.S. intelligence that we don't know what these things are, and they are UAPs. To admit that in the most slightest way I think is a significant step. So that's quite symbolic for me.
So I disagree in that regard. I actually think it's like noise, and that, or I don't know, or it's kind of, as Valdes said, it's pretty matter of factly like said that it's probably a mix of like airborne clutter, atmospheric phenomena, you know, and I mean, it does list foreign adversary systems and so on, but like my feeling is like in that sense, it might be literal noise, or it's not the thing that if you're getting like hyped up about it, it is that it's more, which is not to say like it's not worthy of investigation, but maybe it's like something that could be researched elsewhere than in national security or something. But yeah, I don't know, maybe that's why it's interesting.
I also don't think we should lionize the national security establishment as some kind of like insightful or particularly like, I don't know what the word is, like truthful or insight. Like I'm like deeply skeptical of those kinds of places and stuff like that. Like I don't think that's like a sign that there's some kind of like substantiveness behind it. I mean, if anything, it's the opposite.
When you say skeptical,
that's where it comes from.
You mean like skeptical of their ability or skeptical of their objectives, or both?
Yeah, I think both. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the objectives is the obvious one, but I was, really wondering about the ability. Yeah, fair.
Yeah, I mean, the ability thing is, they had so much power and then they messed up so many places in the world through the 20th century. I don't have that much faith in it. I think with Udit, I agree, like having an open mind shouldn't be a license to some kind of like, I don't like when people hint that it might be some kind of like thing that I think there isn't that much evidence for. But yeah, having an open mind to stuff we don't understand, like definitely. I mean, I think that's like entirely beyond reasonable.
Valdes, what's your weakest signal?
It's so stupid. It's anyway, so I picked picoCAD, the dumbest computer program out there, and it runs on like a fantasy console, which I had never heard about, but it's like a recent trend where it's basically like a virtualized, it's kind of, I guess, like what an emulator might have been. And so like a virtualized machine that you can run on your computer, or it's so small you can run it on a Pi, like a Raspberry Pi as well. And so it's kind of part of this like maker type of scene. And then the picoCAD is a specific program for the fantasy console known as Pico 8, which is like a 3D CAD program for pixel art, which I think is fantastic. And I was watching some reviews of people talking about it, and every single person was like they were like, this is actually like pretty high powered relative to what you think it is. Like you can do all this texture mapping, which is sort of GIF is doing right now. They're like texture mapping onto the images and whatnot. There's some toasters floating around, and it's like a pay what you can type of thing. And it's tiny. It's like 5 megabytes. It's like absolutely ridiculously small. And you can export GIFs and things like that. So it's kind of something we talked about today. I don't know what the Signal 4 would be in any way, but like I really want to use it. I know that. That's like as soon as I see it, I'm like, you know, there's obviously the aesthetic of cuteness, like nostalgia, the whole idea of like emulation. Yeah, I don't know.
That emulator piece, so it's like an emulator for a console that never existed, though, is the idea? Is that what like you were getting at?
That's why it's like fantasy console, I guess. So it's like it never existed.
That's a cool concept.
There's like a whole creative suite on Pico 8. Like you can get music editing software, coding environments, map making tools.
I love the 8-bit aesthetic of it.
Wow.
Yeah, I think fantasy consoles are super cool. That to me is like the super interesting Signal, which is like what it is like people building like essentially like a container fake computing environment, which is like hyper simplistic. And the reason why you do that is because like people want to be building games that are like interacting with your machine in the same way that they would have like back in the day when you had emulators where you actually knew what the computer was doing, like down to the bit level. Like now there's so many layers of abstraction between like the code that you're writing versus how it's operating at the metal layer down to the transistors that it feels like you're so far removed from like the craft of like game making, L coding or whatever. And so like these fantasy consoles are like a way for people to be like working with these like actually like sometimes even like made up computers that never existed. And they're highly inefficient because you're basically running a computer and running a mini computer on top of the computer. So actually, I shouldn't say that. They're not always really inefficient. Sometimes they're inefficient. And like, but it's only so that you have this like highly containerized, like highly curated environment to develop your game in, which is, I think it's like really cool that people are like wanting to develop code in a way that actually goes against most people's like intuitive understanding where coding should have gone or is going.
I feel like because it's like more lo-fi, it comes with a set of limitations and constraints so that in a sense it almost become more accessible because you're not like inundated by like a huge amount of choices that sometimes I find with like modeling technology. I'm like just overwhelmed and I can't even begin.
Yeah, that's definitely why I want to pop it open and make some GIF shapes and things.
That's what's interesting. It's like appealing. It's like you just want to try it.
I wonder if it can run on mobile as well.
There are people who are writing like fantasy consoles that can be run inside like a Chrome browser or whatever. So imagine running a mini computer fully inside your browser, which is kind of cool.
Eric, are we going to get an EEP game coming out on one of these?
Well, my gears are rolling. Let's say you import a PNG file or a texture or JPEG, and it will actually translate that into a pixel representation. Is that how I understand how the texturing is happening?
I think for texturing, yeah.
That's amazing.
I mean, there's a very active community and there's like a lot of like YouTube videos of people like showing what they're doing. I mean, my favorite thing is that they open it like expecting to have a little bit of fun and then they're just like, wait a minute, this is like more capability than I thought it was going to have. Like it's more than it needs to have. That's what people seem to keep saying, which I think is like a nice little touch.
Yes, like visibly speaking, it looks fun, looks like I want to play with pixels. It's even the UI is pixelated and you just want to play with it, but then you realize like it's almost like a, lack of a better word, a little Trojan horse. Like you get into it, you're like, oh, hell, this is crazy. Well, it works in Blender too. You can export to Blender, or these are OBJ files. So like if you
it looks very different when you export it to Blender.
How would that look like?
It looks like a normal model, like it's unpixelated and stuff like that once you export it.
But if you use your fantasy platform, you export that as a GIF, then it's going to be, it will retain its pixel animation. Yeah, thank you for sharing this.
I mean, I think Macy was hinting at this too, or I've been also like hinting at the idea of like, because it's like so easy to use, I do wonder if like people are going to, whether 3D modeling is like a thing that people might actually like end up doing, things like memes and stuff like that, you know? Or like stickers, when you had that sticker example, I was like, oh, I actually don't even know like many stickers done in 3D? Like, are people sending 3D stickers?
No, I don't think so. I feel like the aesthetics of that has like generally been the 2D, but yeah, I'd be curious to
Ruins the whole
see.
skeuomorphic metaphor.
Yeah.
No 3D stickers. All right, this is signal or noise. Would it?
I think it's super cool. I think it's Signal because it's cool. It's like I like people creating these like weird sandbox computing environments that they're experimenting in outside of like the constraints of traditional computing.
Eric, signal or noise?
I would say this is Signal. Yeah, it's totally like a great way of if anything, just even education itself. Just like if you want, for creators to dabble with it and have fun with it. And then, yeah, I think it's a great way to segue creators to this world.
Macy, signal or noise?
Yeah, Signal, super fun. I want to play with it. Yeah, it's just like, I guess, more towards like more accessible tools in this realm.
Unanimous signal. Udit, what's your weakest signal?
This is a project that was released just this afternoon. And I thought it would be interesting to talk about it here by GitHub, which is a company now owned by Microsoft that has this essentially social network of coding project repositories where people like can collaboratively code together and like share the code, and has created this sort of social network also around collaborating on tech projects together. It's very popular among open source communities. But they have this new project, which was launched this afternoon, called GitHub Copilot. So GitHub Copilot is powered by Codex, the new AI system created by OpenAI. GitHub Copilot understands significantly more context than most code assistants. Essentially, you can write code in terms of just descriptions, and it'll finish up the code for you. You can write what the output you were expecting is, and it will create the function for you. So it's a lot of essentially like co-writing, and what in other spaces we call kind of like Centaur AI, which is like you're working like in conjunction with AI to like produce an output together. And they are talking about it as sort of like a replacement to pair programming, which is like a very sort of like popular programming paradigm in the last like decade, 2 decades, where you were working with another programmer. One would be kind of like steering, co-piloting, and you would actually be typing, or like one of the programmers would be typing, the other person would be telling them what to type. And the idea was that it would be a way for both like upskilling, sharing skills, sharing knowledge, and also like reducing the amount of error, because you're simultaneously validating the code. One person is talking, the other person is typing. It's like an interesting program. But the other thing that's interesting is like how it's been received by the developer audience, in that it's like extremely, extremely polarized. And a lot of people who've tried it have been like, oh, it was actually like really much better than I was expecting it to be, because it like suggested solutions that I would have not necessarily come up with, and so on. So, there was like a creative element, which is very cool. But the people who've been complaining about it have been complaining about this being the kind of like next stage of what has been termed in the industry as cargo cult programming, which is basically people taking code from like online sources, not quite understanding it, putting it into their systems because it just kind of works, which leads to like culturally, it leads to like this sort of like magical understanding of what technology is, and like not quite understanding like why you've implemented things the way that you have. And over time, it builds up a lot of technical debt because you've like built systems upon systems upon systems, which are built on things that you don't quite understand. And it can lead to eventually unmaintainable code, really inefficient code, whatever. And, like some of these like old school programmers are like, oh, is this even programming at this point? Like, what are we doing here? But like, you need to understand the code that you're actually writing. So I don't know. I think it's like an interesting signal of where programming is going or could be going, and the kind of tensions that it's creating in the industry around like what people understand is the job of a programmer.
That's interesting. So in that argument, it feels like there could be a debate on like calculator abacus in this sense. Like those people making that argument are clearly saying it's a calculator and it'll get you somewhere, but you're not going to really understand the foundations.
To me, it's like the culture like matters a lot, right? Like how you end up using it matters more than like what the tool itself is imposing. And right. You can argue that like tools impose culture or whatever, but I think there are ways to use this where it is valuable. And like immediately when I started looking at it, I was like, oh, there's like things that I can see myself using this. Where I'm like quickly like prototyping something, and I just want to like, I know what the output needs to be, I know what the input is, I need it to like generate the steps to get from input to output, and then I can quickly look at it and be like, oh yeah, that makes sense, I agree. But I think a lot of programmers would say you have to understand your code, and like the act of actually writing it out is like a way for you to understand it, and in itself is like the creative act, also the productive act.
Could lead to terminal laziness.
Yeah.
To circle back to Macy's idea. And how impressive is it? Like I mean, you used it and you said people are saying it's better. Like, it's
very impressive. It's
yeah.
it's like quite impressive, I think.
Is it a mechanical Turk?
No, it's like running like live with you. So it's clearly no human behind it. But the thing is, like, they have like GitHub has access to all these like open source code repositories that it's trained.
It's like really smart search, basically.
Yeah.
It's really smart search. And it like figures out like what other people have done in similar contexts and brings it to you. And a lot of development environments had something called autocomplete before, which is like autocomplete that you have in search and whatever too. But this is like they're kind of like hyper advanced autocomplete in that it's like
the way searching was working on GitHub before. Like
well, it's not just, it's like it integrates into your development, into your text editor. So if I'm like, I have my text editor open, I start typing a function or whatever, and it'll like take the context of the file that I'm working in my text editor and like bring the intelligence that it's gathered from like across all projects known to GitHub, synthesize that, and bring you suggestions of how to complete the piece that you're working on.
So I wonder, because since it's having all this like, existing repository, I guess it also knows which is the more efficient code generated. When you have seen something, oh, I never thought about that way.
It's not just like efficiency, but it's also like what services that you can, what third-party services you can use to do things. The example that they have here on their website is like, you can say, get the rating of this book by ISBN number or something. And then it just knows that there's Goodreads, which is a company that provides an API service, which can do a lookup to get that rating if you need it in your application for whatever reason. And it'll just generate all that code for you, which is like, okay, there's a company that's called Goodreads that has an API through which you can gather like the rating for this book and produce all the code to like give you that rating that you can use in the remaining portion of your code. So it knows all these services that exist and can formulate the requests.
So the output can be written in layman's terms. Like, is it kind of just like Google searching, but then it'll find the code for you to do what you want to do?
You can write the code in layman's terms and it will output the code in the actual coding language. But it won't be perfect all the time.
Yeah.
Because like, that's why it's called Copilot. You have to like work with it to like
massage it
to be exactly.
Yeah, it gives you a starting point.
But like the starting points are like quite good. They're very, very high quality. It's quite impressive, I think.
With this intelligence that's built in, I guess it also learns programmers' habits.
Style, yes.
Style.
Yeah.
And then tries to find that middle ground.
Yeah.
It'll probably lead to a lot of really cool things being made.
I think it's going to lead to you starting a project and finishing it much faster because you're just like writing out, like you're basically writing out your ideas. It's generating the output and then you're fixing it. So it can like really like speed up like the development process.
Do you feel that, as let's say a beginner into the world of programming were to be introduced to this system, for example, like, a simple one example, like event listeners, right? You got to, dispatch events, listen to events, all these mechanisms that are communicating with each other. I'm a beginner and I was doing it, and then suddenly all this stuff spit out. Of like, okay, we have the code stub of how the communication handles between classes, etc. Like, wouldn't that just overwhelm the user? Like, I'm wondering.
Yeah.
Do you think that the user who's going to be using this would be something part of more intermediate or advanced?
I think you have to be a good programmer to use this. I don't think this is like lowers the barrier for like programming. I think it just speeds up programming for people who are good at programming.
It expedites, because I don't want to write the same comment and code stubs and this and that.
Yeah. And that is like the criticism. I think that's actually the criticism that people are making right now, which is like, if you understand this as something that lowers the barrier, it's going to lead to like really shitty code because people are just going to take the output of this thing without realizing how it's not always accurate, without quite realizing how it's being used. And like them, I imagine there will be like market pressures for wanting to use something like this, even for like creating code more accessibly. It's the same kind of like criticism that people had of like coding boot camps and stuff, which is like, on the one hand, it's like increased accessibility, but it's also like led to a lot of shitty code and a lot of like unmaintainable systems and like a lot of like technical debt that we've sort of incurred over the years. And I can see both sides to the argument. Like I understand why people are critical of boot camps also for that reason.
So how many languages can it, any language, right?
There's a list of languages, but it's quite well, okay, so the preview, the beta that's released currently is Python, JavaScript, TypeScript, Ruby, and Go, which is like very popular programming languages. So a lot of projects are in those languages. So
signal or noise, fathers?
I don't know. There's a lot to say. I mean, I think it's very cool. And I think there's a French theorist who like talks about like automation, what I really like, who's like, it's not that we're being automated, it's that we already automated ourselves, and like machines are just coming, like we already invented the things for machines to come take because of the way we divided up labor and built basically, I mean, in this instance, how we built up like the kind of coding universe, which is like a bunch of shared libraries, right? Like something like, I was reading a stat, like 97% of web applications are just reused shared libraries that people have pulled from places. So it's like, it's already automated, right? It's just, it's waiting for automation to come. That's like an interesting part. And I think it's cool too, like as a learning tool, as Eric was saying, like, I think it makes me think of like Duolingo and stuff where like, I don't know, people, I think thought that computer translation would like render people's interest in learning other languages, like would make it disappear, when I think it's like the opposite. It's like, I think more people are learning that. I mean, I don't know what the stats are, but like it's so easy with things like Duolingo and stuff like that to pick up stuff and learn. And I feel like this thing makes me think of that, where I'm like, I don't know, the few times I've tried to code, I think it'd be very helpful if somebody suggested a library that I could then just look at and try to understand, not just implement blindly, but actually like walk through. And that was like always a big hurdle. It was like, it's very hard to find when you don't know even where to start or something. It can be hard. So it's kind of cool as like a lowering the barrier to entry. That was a lot.
Well, to your point too, Duolingo, I'm sure there's a lot of psychology research to make it how it is today, like how effective it is in learning a language. I wonder, I guess with psychology or whatever research would also be associated in learning a programming language. I wonder if there's some sort of similarities in that respect.
Macy, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's really cool. Yeah, I'm curious to see like what Valdez is saying. I think it would be a really nice learning tool, but curious to see if they could like integrate features that like instead of just suggesting the code, like an autocomplete thing, whether there could be explanations or even like implementing, because that's why GitHub is great. Like there's comments and all of that. So like implementing some transparency into like why that selection was made or what is suggesting would be really good.
That's cool. Does any of you want to say whether you think it's a signal or noise?
I think it's a signal because I think it goes back to our earlier discussions today regards to this idea of like society moving in a more holistic manner in engagement. Here is another example in the programming world where we are creating super higher levels of abstraction. And do we know what's going on behind the scenes? Maybe not, but this allows us to have an open mind, and perhaps these higher level abstractions can yield new, quote unquote, innovative creativity. And that idea of IoT, singularity, these are the platforms I believe will propel us to that direction.
Boss me on IoT singularity. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Fathers.
I mean, Uda highlighted like the potential for like the technical debt thing, but like there are like movements in the urban stuff, I think is built on the premise that all this technical debt that we're building up is like, it's unfixable and it needs to be like kind of reset from the ground up and whatnot. And so the idea of like 20 years from now, some kind of like, who knows, like some critical system that we didn't realize like is just filled with like layers of like spaghetti code that just nobody can disentangle, that suddenly like isn't working. I don't know. I think there's like definitely signal for that technical debt stuff in some future state.
It feels like that conversation of like being for it or against it on principle is like at a high level view or like broadly is like boring, but I'm sure there's tons of these like little like nuanced conversations within it that are probably extremely important that I have no idea about. Can I see signal and noise?
Signal, like another example of ways we can collaborate with AI as opposed to like thinking about how, you know, it's like taking over our roles instead. So more so looking at like how to leverage this as a tool to like what Udo was saying. So like how can we prototype more efficiently or like as opposed to those counter arguments that it's replacing the programmers.
Udo, you've mentioned it was impressive. Do you find that it was like, how surprising do you think this is? Or were you expecting something like this later? How iterative have tools like this been?
It's not that surprising to me based on like what I've seen with GPT-3 last year. And like what's I think like interesting to me now is that there's a couple of things. Like one is the fact that it's GitHub, so like they do have access to all this code. And so they have this like ever expanding like a library of information, ever expanding data set to train this AI on, which I think is going to continue to get like really fucking good.
Broadcast from later.